23 years of lies collapsed. Mom weaponized my daughter, bled 36K, forged proof. I shocked them both with one choice: stop now or lose everything. On Father's Day, my daughter handed me a folded piece of paper with trembling fingers and tears in her eyes. "Dad, I need you to read this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. I had no idea that those simple words would unravel 23 years of lies, expose a betrayal so deep it would shatter our family forever, and lead to consequences that would haunt us all for years to come. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The morning started like any other Father's Day. Sarah had driven over from her apartment downtown, carrying a small gift bag and wearing that forced smile I'd grown accustomed to seeing whenever family gatherings felt obligatory rather than joyful. At 25, she'd inherited her mother's sharp cheekbones and determined jawline, but lately there was something different in her eyes, something haunted. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," she said, settling into the leather armchair that had been her favorite spot since childhood. The same chair where she'd curled up with picture books, where we'd shared countless bedtime stories, where she'd cried over her first heartbreak at 16. I opened her gift first, a coffee mug that read, "World's OK's Dad," with a cartoon drawing that was supposed to be funny. We both laughed, but it felt hollow, forced, like we were actors playing roles we'd outgrown but didn't know how to abandon. "Your turn," I said, handing her the envelope I'd prepared. Inside was a check for $2,000, the same amount I'd been giving her every month since she graduated college. Money she claimed was for rent, groceries, student loans. Money that helped her maintain the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to while she figured out her career path. She stared at the check for a long moment, longer than usual. Her hands were shaking slightly, and I noticed she'd been biting her nails again, a nervous habit from childhood that only surfaced during times of extreme stress. "Dad, we need to talk," she said finally, her voice carrying a weight that made my stomach clench with sudden dread. That's when she pulled out the folded piece of paper. Not a card, not a letter, just a simple sheet of notebook paper that looked like it had been crumpled up and smoothed out several times. The kind of paper someone writes on when they're trying to find the courage to say something that can't be taken back. "I wrote this 3 weeks ago," Sarah continued, her eyes fixed on the coffee table between us. "I've been carrying it around, trying to decide if I should give it to you. I've thrown it away twice and fished it back out of the garbage." The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Outside, I could hear the Hendersons' kids playing in their backyard, their laughter carrying through the open window like an echo from a happier time. A time when Father's Day meant something different in our house. "Sarah, whatever it is, we can work through it," I said, though something in her expression told me this wasn't about money troubles or career confusion. This was something deeper, something that had been eating away at her for weeks, maybe months. She handed me the paper with the same careful deliberation someone might use to pass along a lit stick of dynamite. "Just read it, Dad, please, and then I'll explain everything." I unfolded the paper with hands that had suddenly grown unsteady. Sarah's handwriting filled the page, the same careful script she'd used for school assignments and thank you notes. But the words, when I began to read them, felt like physical blows. "Dad, I can't keep lying to you anymore. The money you've been giving me every month, the money you think is helping me get on my feet, it's not going where you think it's going. I haven't been struggling to pay rent or buy groceries. I haven't been paying off student loans or saving for my future. I've been giving it to someone else, someone who convinced me that keeping this secret was the only way to protect our family." My eyes moved to the next paragraph, each word landing with the impact of a hammer blow. "For the past 18 months, I've been giving your money to Mom. Not for anything noble or necessary, but to keep her quiet about something she discovered. Something about you that she said would destroy everything if it ever came out. She told me you'd been having an affair, that she had proof, and that if I didn't help her financially, she'd expose you publicly and ruin your reputation, your business, everything you've worked for." The paper began to blur as my hands shook. I had to read that paragraph 3 times before the full meaning sank in. My ex-wife, Linda, the woman I'd divorced 5 years ago after discovering her own infidelity, had been extorting our daughter, using her love for me as a weapon to extract money that I was unknowingly providing. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was coming next. I believed her, Dad. I believed every word because I was so angry with you for leaving Mom, for breaking up our family, for choosing your pride over trying to make things work. When she showed me the photos, the text messages, the hotel receipts, I didn't question them. I wanted them to be true because it would mean that everything that went wrong was your fault, not hers. Photos, text messages, hotel receipts, evidence of an affair that had never happened, manufactured by a woman who'd perfected the art of manipulation over 22 years of marriage. But last week, I showed everything to my friend Jessica, the one who works in digital forensics. She looked at the photos for maybe 10 minutes before she started pointing out inconsistencies. The metadata on the images showed they'd been heavily edited. The text messages were from a number that traced back to a prepaid phone Mom had purchased. The hotel receipts were for dates when I knew you were out of town on business trips, alone. I set the letter down for a moment, my chest tight with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Not rage at Sarah. She'd been manipulated by someone who knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. Rage at Linda for weaponizing our daughter's love and turning it into a tool for financial gain. Sarah, I started, but she held up her hand. Please finish reading it, Dad. There's more. I picked up the paper again, though every instinct told me I didn't want to know what else my ex-wife had done. When I confronted Mom about the fake evidence, she didn't deny it. She laughed. Dad? She actually laughed and said I should be thanking her for giving me a way to help you pay for your mistakes, even if the mistakes weren't real. She said you owed her for all the years she wasted being married to you, and this was just evening the score. The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a physical blow. Linda hadn't just lied and manipulated, she'd enjoyed it. She'd taken pleasure in turning our daughter into an unwilling accomplice in a scheme designed to punish me for crimes I'd never committed. I've given her $36,000 of your money over the past 18 months, Dad. $36,000 that was supposed to help me build a life, that you gave out of love and support, that I handed over to someone who was using it to buy designer handbags and take vacations while telling me I was saving our family from scandal. $36,000. I thought about all the times I'd worried about Sarah's finances, all the extra hours I'd worked to make sure I could help her, all the sacrifices I'd made to ensure my daughter had what she needed. Money that had been flowing directly into the hands of the woman who'd already taken half of everything I'd worked for in our divorce. The worst part isn't the money, though. The worst part is what I've become. I've been lying to you for 1.5 years, Dad. Every time you asked how I was doing, every time you worried about my rent or my groceries, every time you told me you were proud of how responsible I was being with money, I was lying to your face. I've been stealing from you while you thought you were helping me. I looked up at Sarah, who was crying silently in her chair, tears streaming down her face as she watched me read about her deepest shame. I know you'll never forgive me for this, and I don't expect you to. I know I've destroyed any trust between us, and I know that every dollar you gave me believing you were investing in my future was actually funding Mom's revenge against you. But I couldn't keep living with this secret, especially today, on Father's Day, when you're celebrating being the kind of father who would sacrifice anything for his daughter. The letter continued, but I had to stop reading. The room was spinning, and I felt like I might be sick. Everything I'd believed about the past 18 months was a lie. Every conversation with Sarah, every proud moment when I thought about how well she was managing her independence, every time I'd bragged to friends about my responsible daughter, it had all been built on deception. But the deception hadn't started with Sarah. It had started with Linda, who'd taken our daughter's love from me and twisted it into something ugly and destructive, who'd convinced a young woman who was already struggling with the aftermath of her parents' divorce that she was protecting her father by enabling her mother's lies. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the coffee table between us. Sarah was still crying, her whole body shaking with the weight of 18 months of guilt and shame. "Sarah," I said quietly, my voice hoarse with emotion, "look at me." She raised her head, her eyes red and swollen, expecting to see anger or disappointment or the end of our relationship written across my face. Instead, she saw something she hadn't expected: relief. "You're not the villain in this story," I said, leaning forward in my chair. "You're another one of her victims." The words seemed to hit Sarah like a physical force. Her crying intensified, but it was different now. Not the quiet, ashamed tears of someone expecting punishment, but the raw, overwhelming sobs of someone who'd been carrying a burden too heavy for their shoulders. "I don't understand," she managed between breaths. "Aren't you angry? Don't you hate me for what I've done?" I moved from my chair to the couch beside her, the same way I used to when she had nightmares as a child. "Sarah, you were 23 years old when this started. Your mother is a master manipulator who spent 22 years perfecting her techniques on me. She knew exactly how to make you believe you were doing the right thing. But even as I comforted my daughter, a cold rage was building in my chest. Not at Sarah, never at Sarah, but at the woman who'd orchestrated this elaborate scheme. Linda hadn't just stolen money from me, she'd stolen 18 months of honest relationship with our daughter. She'd poisoned every interaction Sarah and I had shared, turning my pride in her independence into a cruel joke. "Tell me everything," I said, handing Sarah the box of tissues from the side table. "Start from the beginning. When did she first approach you about this?" Sarah wiped her eyes and took a shuddering breath. "It was right after New Year's last year. I was having coffee with her, just a normal catch-up lunch, and she seemed nervous about something. She kept checking her phone, looking around the restaurant like she was afraid someone would overhear us. I could picture the scene perfectly. Linda in performance mode, creating drama and urgency where none existed, setting the stage for her manipulation. She told me she'd hired a private investigator after the divorce because she suspected you were hiding assets. She said the investigator had found something much worse than financial deception. She said you'd been having an affair during the last 2 years of your marriage and that she had proof." "What kind of proof?" I asked, though I already knew from the letter that it had all been fabricated. "Photos of you with a woman at restaurants, hotels, text messages between you and someone named Rebecca, credit card statements showing expensive dinners and hotel stays. She had everything organized in this manila folder, like she was building a legal case." Rebecca. I remembered her now, a colleague from the regional office who'd worked on the Morrison account with me 3 years ago. We'd had exactly 4 business dinners together, always with at least 2 other team members present. The hotel stays would have been legitimate business travel, probably confirmed by expense reports Linda could have accessed when we were still married. "She told me she was going to go public with everything," Sarah continued. "She said she was going to send the evidence to your clients, to the newspaper, to everyone in your professional network. She said she wanted the whole city to know what kind of man you really were." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Linda knew that my reputation was everything in my industry. A scandal like that, even a fabricated one, could have destroyed decades of relationship building and professional credibility. She'd found the perfect pressure point and applied it through the one person I'd do anything to protect. But then she said she'd reconsidered. She said that destroying you would hurt me too, since you were still supporting me financially. She said she'd decided to be merciful and keep the information private, but only if I helped her with her own financial situation. "How much did she ask for initially?" $2,000 a month. The exact amount you were giving me." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "She said it was perfect symmetry you were unknowingly paying for your own sins." I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. Linda had calculated this down to the last detail, ensuring that the amount would be sustainable without raising my suspicions, while also maximizing her monthly take from the scheme. "Did she ever explain why she needed the money?" Sarah nodded miserably. "She said the divorce settlement wasn't enough to maintain her lifestyle. She said you'd hidden assets from the court, so she was just taking what was rightfully hers anyway. She made it sound like she was the victim of some grand injustice. The divorce settlement had been generous to a fault. Linda had received half of everything we'd accumulated during our marriage, plus substantial alimony for 3 years. The idea that she needed additional funds to maintain her lifestyle was absurd, but I was beginning to understand that this had never been about money. This had been about control, about finding a way to keep hurting me long after our marriage had ended. "Sarah, I need you to understand something very important," I said, taking her hands in mine. "Your mother wasn't struggling financially. Last month she bought a new BMW. 3 months ago she went to Europe for 2 weeks. The money you were giving her wasn't keeping her afloat, it was funding luxuries she felt entitled to at your expense and mine." Sarah's face crumpled again. "I know that now. When Jessica showed me the fake evidence, I started paying attention to Mom's social media posts, her shopping habits, the restaurants she was going to. She was living better than ever while telling me she could barely make ends meet. How did you finally figure out the truth?" It was something small, actually. Last month, she posted a picture of herself at that new spa downtown, the one that charges $300 for a facial. The same week, she'd called me crying about not being able to afford her car payment. I started adding things up, and nothing made sense. I thought about all the times over the past 18 months when I'd noticed Sarah seemed stressed or distracted. All the occasions when she'd seemed uncomfortable taking money from me, or when she'd changed the subject quickly when I asked about her finances. The signs had been there, but I'd misread them as normal growing pains of a young adult learning to manage independence. The night I confronted her about the fake evidence, Sarah continued, she didn't even try to deny it at first. She just sat there smiling while I showed her Jessica's analysis. And then she said something that made my blood run cold. What did she say? She said, "Well, even if the affair didn't happen, it should have. Your father was never good enough for me, and now he gets to pay for wasting the best years of my life." Sarah's voice broke as she repeated the words. She wasn't even pretending it was about justice anymore. She was just enjoying it. The casual viciousness of that statement revealed everything I needed to know about Linda's true motivations. This hadn't been about exposing infidelity or seeking justice for wrongs committed. This had been about revenge, pure and simple. Revenge against me for having the audacity to leave her after discovering her own affair. Revenge against life for not giving her everything she felt she deserved. What happened after you confronted her? She tried to backtrack at first, said I was misunderstanding her, that she'd only been trying to protect me from painful truths. But when I told her I was going to tell you everything, she dropped the act completely. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the Henderson kids still playing in their yard. She told me that if I exposed her, she'd make sure everyone knew I was complicit. She said she'd tell people I was in on the scheme from the beginning, that I'd helped her create the fake evidence because I wanted revenge on you for divorcing her. Even in defeat, Linda was still manipulating, still trying to control the narrative and protect herself at Sarah's expense. The woman I'd once loved, who'd given birth to the daughter I cherished more than life itself, had become something unrecognizable, a predator who would sacrifice anyone, including her own child, to feed her need for control and revenge. She said no one would believe that a 23-year-old could be fooled by such an obvious scam. She said everyone would assume I was smart enough to see through her lies, which meant I must have been a willing participant. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated and cruel. Linda had trapped Sarah in a web where every possible escape route led to more shame and consequences. She'd isolated her daughter from potential help by convincing her that the truth would only make things worse. "Is that why you waited so long to tell me?" Sarah nodded, tears flowing again. "I was terrified that you'd think I was just as guilty as she was. I was afraid you'd believe I'd helped her hurt you on purpose, that I'd wanted to see you suffer." I stood up and joined her at the window, placing my hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, look at me." She turned, her eyes still red and swollen. "I know you. I've known you for 25 years. I've watched you cry over injured birds and give your lunch money to homeless people. I've seen you stay up all night helping friends with their problems. The idea that you would willingly participate in hurting me is absurd." "But I did hurt you," she whispered. "I took your money and gave it to her. I lied to you for 18 months. You were manipulated by someone who's had decades of practice at manipulation. You were trying to protect me from what you believed was devastating information. Your actions came from love, even if they were misguided." Sarah leaned against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "I keep thinking about all the times you worried about me, all the extra shifts you probably worked to make sure you could help with my expenses, and I was just funneling it all to her while she laughed about it." The image of Linda laughing about our daughter's distress made my chest tight with anger. But I forced myself to focus on Sarah, who was still carrying the weight of guilt that belonged entirely to her mother. "The money is just money," I said, though $36,000 represented months of work and sacrifice. "What matters is that you found the courage to tell me the truth. That couldn't have been easy." It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I wrote that letter a dozen times. I kept thinking about how disappointed you'd be, how this would be the end of our relationship. I turned her to face me fully. "Sarah, this isn't the end of our relationship. This is the beginning of an honest one. For the first time in 18 months, I'm talking to my real daughter, not someone who's been forced to perform a role. She collapsed against me then, the way she used to when she was small and the world felt too big and scary. I held her while she cried, feeling the weight of her relief mixing with my own rage at the woman who'd put us both through this ordeal. But even as I comforted Sarah, my mind was already moving toward the next phase of this situation. Linda thought she'd won. She thought she'd successfully manipulated our daughter and extracted thousands of dollars from me without consequences. She thought she was untouchable, protected by Sarah's shame and my ignorance. She was about to discover how wrong she was. After Sarah had cried herself out, we sat together on the couch in silence for several minutes. The weight of 18 months of deception was slowly lifting from her shoulders, but I could see she was still processing the magnitude of what had happened. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the living room where so many family moments had unfolded over the years. "Dad," Sarah said finally, her voice hoarse from crying. "What happens now? I mean, with Mom?" It was the question I'd been dreading, because the answer required me to make a decision that would fundamentally change our family dynamic forever. Linda had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She hadn't just stolen money, she'd weaponized our daughter's love and turned it into a tool for her own revenge. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But I do know that what she did was more than just morally wrong. What she did was criminal." Sarah's eyes widened. "Criminal? But she's my mother." "Sarah, what your mother did is called extortion. She threatened to damage my reputation unless you gave her money. The fact that the threats were based on lies doesn't change the legal definition. And the fact that she used you as an intermediary doesn't protect her from prosecution." The color drained from Sarah's face. "Are you going to have her arrested?" I studied my daughter's expression carefully. Even after everything Linda had done, even after the manipulation and lies and months of psychological torture, Sarah was still worried about protecting her mother. It was a testament to the kind of person she was, and it made me even angrier at Linda for exploiting that goodness. "I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure she can never hurt you again," I said. "But before I make any decisions, I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with." Over the next hour, Sarah walked me through every detail of the past 18 months. She showed me text messages from Linda, always carefully worded to avoid explicit admissions of blackmail, but clearly designed to maintain pressure and urgency. She explained how Linda had gradually increased her demands, asking for additional money for emergencies that never seemed to be resolved. Last month, she said she needed an extra $1,000 because her car needed repairs, Sarah said, scrolling through her phone. But then I saw on Instagram that she'd gotten her hair done at that expensive salon downtown, the one that charges $500 just for highlights. Each new detail painted a clearer picture of Linda's systematic exploitation. This hadn't been a desperate woman trying to survive. It had been a calculated campaign of financial and emotional abuse designed to maximize her gain while minimizing her risk of exposure. "Did she ever threaten you directly?" I asked. "I mean, beyond the threat to expose the fake affair?" Sarah nodded reluctantly. "A few times. Once, when I told her I was struggling to come up with the money, she said it would be a shame if my employer found out I was involved in blackmailing my own father. She said it might affect my career prospects." My hands clenched involuntarily. Linda had threatened to destroy Sarah's professional reputation to ensure continued compliance with her scheme. She'd turned our daughter into both victim and accomplice, then used that dual role as additional leverage. Another time she said she'd hate for you to find out that I'd been lying to you all this time. She said you'd never forgive me for the deception and that I'd lose both parents because of my poor judgment. The psychological manipulation was masterful and cruel. Linda had isolated Sarah from potential help by convincing her that every possible escape route would lead to catastrophic consequences. She'd created a prison of shame and fear, then positioned herself as the only person who could keep Sarah safe from the consequences of her own victimization. "Sarah, I need you to understand something very important," I said, taking her hands again. "Nothing your mother threatened you with was true. I would never blame you for being manipulated. Your employer would never hold you responsible for being the victim of extortion. And I would never, ever stop loving you because you were tricked by someone who's had decades of practice at deception." She squeezed my hands gratefully, but I could see the doubt still lingering in her eyes. 18 months of psychological conditioning couldn't be erased in an afternoon, no matter how much reassurance I provided. "What I don't understand," Sarah said, "is why she waited so long to do something like this. I mean, you've been divorced for 5 years. If she wanted revenge, why didn't she try something sooner?" It was a perceptive question, and the answer revealed something disturbing about Linda's psychological state. Because she couldn't touch me directly anymore. The divorce was final, the assets were divided, the alimony was established. She'd lost her ability to control me through normal means. I stood up and walked to the mantel, where family photos chronicled better times. Sarah's graduation from college, the three of us at her high school prom. Pictures from when we'd been a family, before Linda's infidelity destroyed everything. "But then you moved out and started taking money from me," I continued. "Suddenly, she had access to something she could manipulate. Not me directly, but something I cared about more than myself. You." Sarah's face paled as she understood the implication. "She used me as a weapon against you. She used your love for me as a weapon against both of us. She knew I'd do anything to protect you, and she knew you'd do anything to protect me. She found a way to turn our greatest strength as a family into our greatest vulnerability." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Outside, the Henderson kids had gone inside, leaving their yard empty and quiet. The sun was beginning to set, casting the living room in golden light that reminded me of happier Father's Days when Sarah was young and Linda was still the woman I'd married. "Dad," Sarah said quietly, "there's something else I need to tell you." My stomach tightened. After everything we'd already discussed, what could be worse? Last week, when I confronted Mom about the fake evidence, she said something that's been haunting me. She said this wasn't the first time she'd done something like this. I turned from the mantel to face her fully. "What do you mean?" "She said she'd been planning ways to hurt you since the day the divorce was finalized. She said she'd tried other approaches first, but they hadn't worked as well as this one." The implications sent a chill down my spine. "What other approaches?" Sarah looked sick as she continued. "She said she'd tried to sabotage some of your business relationships early on. Anonymous calls to clients suggesting you were unreliable or unethical. She said she'd even created fake online reviews trying to damage your reputation." I thought back to the months immediately following our divorce, when I'd lost 2 major clients unexpectedly. Both had terminated their contracts citing concerns about my professional conduct without providing specific details. I'd chalked it up to the natural turbulence that followed major life changes, but now I wondered if Linda had been systematically undermining my business. "She also said she'd tried to find ways to get you in trouble with the IRS. She said she'd reported you for hiding assets and underreporting income, hoping they'd audit you and make your life miserable." I had been audited 2 years ago, a stressful and expensive process that had ultimately vindicated my tax reporting, but cost me thousands in accounting fees and months of anxiety. The IRS agent had mentioned that the audit was triggered by an anonymous tip, but I'd never suspected Linda was behind it. But she said none of those approaches gave her the satisfaction she was looking for. They were too indirect, too impersonal. She wanted to hurt you in a way that would make you feel the same betrayal she felt when you left her. The picture that was emerging was of a woman consumed by rage and vindictiveness, someone who'd spent years plotting elaborate schemes for revenge. The extortion plot involving Sarah wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a sustained campaign of harassment and abuse. "Sarah, did she ever hurt you directly? I mean, beyond the emotional manipulation?" She shook her head quickly. "No, nothing physical. But she did say some things that were pretty cruel. She said I was naive and gullible for believing her lies so easily. She said it proved I'd gotten your weak character instead of her strong one." Even in her confession, Linda had found ways to inflict additional psychological damage on our daughter. She'd turned Sarah's compassion and trust into evidence of weakness, poisoning the very qualities that made her such a wonderful person. "She also said that when this was all over, when you found out about the money, you'd probably cut me off completely. She said she'd be the only family I had left, so I'd better stay on her good side." The manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. Linda had created a scenario where Sarah felt trapped between 2 impossible choices: continue enabling the extortion or risk losing both parents. She'd positioned herself as Sarah's only reliable ally while simultaneously being her primary abuser. But the worst thing she said, Sarah continued, her voice barely a whisper, was that she was proud of me for finally showing some backbone. She said I was finally learning to take what I deserved instead of just accepting whatever scraps people threw my way. I felt my jaw clench so hard it was painful. Linda had reframed her daughter's victimization as personal growth, turning extortion into empowerment. She'd convinced Sarah that participating in the scheme was actually a sign of strength rather than manipulation. She said you'd been taking advantage of my good nature for years, giving me just enough money to keep me dependent while never providing enough for real independence. She said I was smart to find a way to get more. The twisted logic was horrifying. Linda had taken my genuine desire to help Sarah transition to independence and recast it as manipulation and control. She'd poisoned every act of parental love and support, turning generosity into exploitation in Sarah's mind. Did you believe her? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Part of me did at first. I was 23 and still taking money from my father every month. It was easy to feel like maybe I wasn't being as independent as I should be. I understood. Sarah was at an age where the line between help and dependence could feel blurry, where accepting parental support could trigger feelings of inadequacy or shame. Linda had exploited that natural insecurity and amplified it into something much darker. But then I started thinking about why you were helping me in the first place. It wasn't because you wanted to control me or keep me dependent. It was because you wanted me to have opportunities you didn't have when you were my age. You wanted me to be able to take internships in entry-level positions without worrying about whether I could afford rent. She was right. After the divorce, I'd watched Linda struggle financially despite the generous settlement, primarily because she'd never learned to live within her means. I'd been determined to give Sarah a different foundation, one that would allow her to build her career without the constant stress of financial instability. I realized that everything Mom was telling me about your motivations was really about her own motivations. She was the one who'd used money to control and manipulate people. She was the one who'd tried to buy loyalty and affection. It was a profound insight, and it showed me that despite everything Linda had put her through, Sarah's fundamental understanding of right and wrong remained intact. She'd been manipulated, but she hadn't been corrupted. That's when I knew I had to tell you the truth, no matter what the consequences were, because keeping her secret was making me just like her, and I couldn't live with that. I moved back to the couch and pulled Sarah into a hug. You are nothing like her. The fact that you found the courage to tell me the truth, knowing how painful it would be, proves that you're exactly the person I raised you to be. We held each other for several minutes, both of us processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. Outside, the sun had set completely, and the neighborhood was settling into evening quiet. But inside our house, everything had changed. The question now was what to do with the information Sarah had given me. Linda's campaign of harassment and manipulation had been going on for years, escalating from anonymous business sabotage to outright extortion. She'd used our daughter as a weapon against me while simultaneously victimizing her. Sarah, I said finally, I want you to know that whatever I decide to do about your mother, it won't be about revenge. It'll be about protection. Protecting you from further manipulation, protecting other people from becoming her victims, and protecting the truth from being buried under more lies. She nodded, understanding the weight of what I was saying. What do you think will happen to her? I don't know, I admitted. But I do know that actions have consequences, and your mother has been avoiding the consequences of her actions for too long. I stood up and walked to my home office, returning with a legal pad and pen. I need you to help me document everything you can remember about the past 18 months. Every conversation, every demand for money, every threat she made. We're going to build a complete record of what she did. Sarah looked scared but determined. Are you going to call the police? I'm going to call my attorney first. Then we'll decide what legal options we have. I sat back down beside her. But Sarah, I want you to understand something. Whatever happens next, you're not responsible for the consequences your mother faces. She made her choices, and she'll have to live with the results. As we began the difficult process of documenting Linda's crimes, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just anger or determination, but clarity. For the first time since our divorce, I fully understood who Linda really was and what she was capable of. And for the first time in 18 months, I had my daughter back. The documentation process took us 3 hours. Sarah's memory was remarkably detailed, probably because the weight of the secret had made every interaction with Linda burn itself into her consciousness. We filled 12 pages with dates, amounts, conversations, and threats. The pattern that emerged was chilling in its calculated progression. She started small, Sarah explained, her pen moving steadily across the legal pad. The first month, she only asked for $1,500. She said she was testing whether I'd actually follow through, whether I really cared enough about protecting you to make sacrifices. I watched my daughter write down the details of her own victimization with clinical precision. She'd found strength in the truth-telling, a sense of purpose in finally being able to fight back against the lies that had consumed her life. When I gave her the money without question, she seemed almost disappointed, like she'd expected more resistance. Sarah paused, tapping her pen against the paper. She said most people would have demanded more proof before agreeing to something so serious. She said my gullibility was both a blessing and a character flaw. Even in success, Linda had found ways to undermine Sarah's confidence. She'd taken our daughter's trust and compassion and reframed them as weaknesses, poisoning the very qualities that made her manipulation possible. The second month, she raised it to the full $2,000 and started adding conditions. I had to promise never to tell you where the money was going. I had to agree to regular check-ins where she'd ask about your mood, your business, your dating life. She wanted intelligence about your life so she could adjust her strategy if needed. Intelligence gathering. Linda had turned our daughter into an unwitting spy, collecting information that could be used to inflict maximum emotional damage. Every casual conversation Sarah and I had shared over the past 18 months had been potentially compromised. Did she ever ask you to do anything else beyond giving her money and information? Sarah nodded reluctantly. A few times. Last Christmas, she wanted me to convince you to have dinner with both of us. She said it would be good for our family healing, but now I think she just wanted to see you squirm, knowing what she had on you. I remembered that conversation. Sarah had been unusually insistent about a family dinner, even after I'd explained that Linda and I needed to maintain boundaries for everyone's emotional health. At the time, I'd thought Sarah was just struggling with the reality of our permanently fractured family. And last month, she asked me to find out if you were dating anyone seriously. She said she was just concerned about your happiness, but the way she asked made me uncomfortable, like she was hoping the answer would be yes so she could use it against you somehow. The predatory nature of Linda's interest in my personal life was disturbing, but not surprising. She'd always been possessive, even during our marriage. The idea that I might find happiness after our divorce would have infuriated her beyond reason. Sarah, I need to ask you something difficult. Did your mother ever suggest that you do anything to actively harm my business or reputation? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the legal pad. Not directly, but she did mention a few times that if I ever got tired of the arrangement, there were other ways I could help her get what she deserved from you. What kind of other ways? She said I had access to your house, your personal papers, your computer when I visited. She said information was valuable and that smart people knew how to use information to their advantage. My blood ran cold. Linda had been grooming Sarah to become an active participant in more serious crimes: industrial espionage, theft of personal information, violation of privacy. She'd been building toward something much worse than simple extortion. Did she ever ask you to actually take anything or look through my personal files? No, but she kept bringing it up. Every few months she'd make some comment about how much easier things would be if she had more detailed information about your business operations or personal finances. She said it casually, like she was just thinking out loud, but it felt like she was testing my reaction. The manipulation was even more sophisticated than I'd realized. Linda hadn't just been extorting money, she'd been gradually conditioning Sarah to accept more serious criminal activity as normal and necessary. She'd been building toward something that could have destroyed both of our lives. The last time she mentioned it was about 6 weeks ago. She said she'd been thinking about our arrangement and that maybe it was time to explore more permanent solutions to our financial challenges. What did she mean by permanent solutions? Sarah's hands were shaking slightly as she continued writing. She said that monthly payments were inefficient, and that it might be better to find a way to access a larger sum all at once. She said you probably had accounts or investments she didn't know about, and that with the right information, she could make sure I inherited what I deserved immediately instead of waiting for you to die naturally. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Linda hadn't just been planning on going extortion, she'd been considering ways to access my entire estate while I was still alive. The word naturally suggested she'd even contemplated more extreme measures. Did she give you any specific instructions about how to find this information? She said I should pay attention to mail that came to your house when I visited. She said I should notice if you left your computer unlocked or if you got phone calls about financial matters. She made it sound like being observant was just smart planning for my future. I thought about all the times over the past few months when Sarah had seemed distracted during visits, when she'd excused herself to use the bathroom or get a drink of water. Had she been wrestling with Linda's suggestions, fighting the urge to snoop through my personal papers? I never did any of it, Sarah said quickly, reading the concern on my face. I thought about it a few times, especially when she'd been particularly insistent about money. But every time I considered it, I'd remember how much you trusted me, how you never locked anything away or acted suspicious when I was here. The idea of betraying that trust felt worse than whatever consequences Mom was threatening. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by pride in my daughter's fundamental decency. Even under sustained psychological pressure, even when convinced she was protecting me from devastating exposure, Sarah had refused to cross that final line. That's actually when I started questioning everything, she continued. I realized that if Mom's evidence was so compelling, if you were really guilty of this terrible betrayal, then why did she need more information? Why wasn't what she already had enough to get whatever justice she was seeking? It was a logical inconsistency that revealed the fundamental weakness in Linda's manipulation. She'd been so focused on extracting maximum value from the scheme that she had overplayed her hand, asking for escalations that didn't make sense if her original story was true. Plus, the way she talked about you when she thought I was fully on her side was so full of hatred. It wasn't the disappointment of someone who'd been betrayed by infidelity. It was the rage of someone who'd been denied something they felt entitled to. Sarah had seen through to the heart of Linda's true motivation. This had never been about justice or healing from betrayal. This had been about punishment, about making me pay for having the audacity to leave her after discovering her own infidelity. When did you first start doubting her story? Honestly, about 3 months in. You were having dinner here one night and Mom called while you were in the kitchen. She wanted to know if you seemed stressed or guilty, if you were acting like someone with a terrible secret. But Dad, you were just making jokes about burning the garlic bread and asking if I needed help with my taxes. You were completely normal. I remembered that evening. We'd been celebrating Sarah's promotion at work, and I'd insisted on cooking dinner even though my culinary skills were questionable at best. It had been one of those comfortable father-daughter moments that I'd treasured, having no idea it was being scrutinized for signs of hidden guilt. I started watching you more carefully after that, looking for any sign that you were carrying the weight of a secret affair. But there was nothing. You were exactly the same person you'd always been. Sad sometimes about the divorce, worried about whether I was happy, proud of my accomplishments, not guilty, just normal. Sarah's voice grew stronger as she talked about her growing certainty of my innocence. The truth had been fighting against Linda's lies all along, and it had finally won. But the thing that really convinced me was how you talked about Mom during that time. Even when I'd bring up the divorce or ask about your feelings, you never said anything cruel about her. You'd just say that sometimes people grow apart, or that you hoped she was finding happiness. If you'd really betrayed her the way she claimed, I don't think you could have been so generous in how you discussed her. It was a perceptive observation, and it showed me that Sarah had been testing Linda's story in ways I hadn't realized. She'd been conducting her own investigation, using her knowledge of my character to evaluate the credibility of her mother's accusations. That's when I started saving every text message, every email, every record of our conversations. I told myself I was just being thorough, but really, I think I was building evidence for the moment when I found the courage to challenge her. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me a folder labeled Mom Stuff that contained hundreds of screenshots and saved messages. The documentation was meticulous, creating a digital trail of Linda's escalating demands and increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control. I kept thinking that if I ever had to prove what was happening, I needed to have everything recorded. I needed people to see that this wasn't just my word against hers. The foresight was remarkable, especially for someone who'd been under such sustained psychological pressure. Sarah had been preparing for this moment of truth, even while she was still trapped in Linda's web of lies. By the time we finished documenting everything, it was nearly midnight. The legal pad was full of dates, amounts, and quotes that painted a clear picture of systematic extortion and manipulation. But more than that, they showed the evolution of Linda's scheme from simple financial extraction to something much more sinister. "Sarah," I said, setting down my pen and looking at the evidence we'd compiled, "I'm proud of you for keeping such detailed records. This documentation is going to be crucial for whatever legal action we decide to pursue." She looked exhausted but relieved, like someone who'd been carrying a heavy burden for miles and had finally been allowed to set it down. "What happens now?" I gathered up the legal pads and Sarah's phone records, creating a neat stack of evidence that represented 18 months of criminal activity. "Now we sleep on it. Tomorrow I'm going to call my attorney and find out what our options are." "Are you really going to have her prosecuted?" It was the question I'd been avoiding all evening, because the answer would affect not just Linda, but our entire family dynamic for years to come. Sarah was Linda's daughter, regardless of what crimes she'd committed. Any legal action I took would force Sarah to choose sides in a way that would leave permanent scars. "Sarah, I want you to understand that whatever I decide, it won't be about revenge. It'll be about preventing her from doing this to other people. Your mother has shown that she's willing to commit serious crimes to get what she wants. She's willing to manipulate and abuse her own daughter to achieve her goals. If I don't stop her now, she'll find other victims." Sarah nodded, though I could see the conflict in her eyes. "I know she's done terrible things. I know she's hurt both of us. But she's still my mother. And that's exactly why this is so hard. Linda used your love for her as a weapon against you. She knew you'd never willingly hurt her, so she felt free to hurt you without consequence." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street where normal families were sleeping peacefully, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in our living room. "But Sarah, love without accountability isn't really love. It's enabling. And enabling someone to commit crimes doesn't help them, it just ensures they'll commit more crimes." She joined me at the window, both of us staring into the darkness. "What if she promises to stop? What if she pays back the money and agrees to leave us alone?" "Do you really think she'll stop?" I asked gently. "Do you think someone who spent years planning elaborate revenge schemes will just give up because she got caught?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "No, she'll probably just get better at hiding it next time." It was a painful realization, but an important one. Linda's behavior wasn't an aberration or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, a fundamental aspect of who she'd become. Without serious consequences, she would continue finding new ways to inflict damage on people who crossed her. "There's something else to consider," I said. "Right now, you're the only person who knows the full truth about what she's done. That makes you dangerous to her. If she's willing to commit extortion and fraud, what else might she be willing to do to protect herself?" Sarah's face paled as she understood the implication. "You think she might try to hurt me to keep me quiet?" "I think she might try to discredit you if she feels cornered. She's already shown that she's willing to threaten your reputation and career to maintain control. If she thinks you're going to expose her, she might escalate to more serious intimidation tactics." We stood in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the weight of the decision ahead. Linda had created a situation where every option carried significant risks and consequences, but doing nothing carried the greatest risk of all: continued victimization and escalation. "Dad," Sarah said finally, her voice small but determined, "I think you should call your lawyer tomorrow. Not because I want to hurt Mom, but because I don't want her to hurt anyone else the way she hurt us." I put my arm around her shoulders, feeling prouder of my daughter than I had in years. Despite everything Linda had put her through, despite the guilt and fear and manipulation, Sarah had found the strength to choose justice over family loyalty. "Whatever happens," I said, "we'll face it together. You're not alone in this anymore." As we finally headed upstairs to bed, I knew that tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and painful decisions. There would be lawyers and police reports, court proceedings and family fractures. Linda's crimes would become public knowledge, exposing our private pain to scrutiny and judgment. But for the first time in 18 months, Sarah and I were on the same side of the truth. For the first time since the extortion began, our relationship was built on honesty rather than manipulation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them as father and daughter should, as allies rather than victims. Linda thought she'd won by turning us against each other. She was about to discover that her greatest victory had actually been her ultimate defeat.